Hello and welcome. In this lecture, we're going to be learning about functions that live not in the level blueprint, but on a particular blueprint class. These are called member functions and are absolutely crucial to object-oriented programming. Let's dive in and see how they work. So in our spawn projectile function in the level blueprint, we've got a load of nodes here relating to adding the impulse, getting the direction of the impulse, and getting the static mesh component. All of these nodes use the BP projectile instance in depth. Wouldn't it be great if we could take all of this code and move it into the BP projectile so that the code that deals with that data lives with the data itself? Well, that's the entire point of object-oriented programming. So we can define object-oriented programming as functions living with the data that they manipulate. So how does this work? How can we make functions on particular instances of things? Well, one way we can do this, we go to open up our BP projectile class and make sure we click Open Full Blueprint Editor. Is you can see that in this full blueprint editor, there is a My Blueprint pane and a function section. So we can hit the plus arrow here to create a new function on the BP projectile class. And I'm going to name this function print your name. And this print your name function should do just that. You can see we've got a node that starts the execution of this function, so we can pull off its execution pin and type print string, so that's going to print out hello. Not exactly the name of this function, is it? But we'll sort that out in just a second. So what we've got here is known as a member function. A member function is a function on a class that always gets called on a particular instance of a class. So you don't say, I'm going to call print your name on all BP projectiles. You have to say, I want to call print your name on BP projectile number 1 or BP projectile that has just been spawned. So if we go to our level blueprint, what you would have to do is take the reference that came out of spawn BP projectile, and from that reference you could call print your name, and you can see it automatically connects to a special input node called target. And obviously you've got to hook up your execution pins as well. I'm going to hook it up to happen after our add impulse. But what's interesting about this special target input node is that if you go over to the BP projectile, you'll see that print your name has no such input node. So what's going on here? Well, implicitly, any member function has a parameter which is its current target or the current instance. And you can get hold of this by right-clicking in the Blueprint event graph and typing self. And you can see there is a node called get a reference to self, and it just creates a self node like this. And then you can use this self object reference to get hold of any of the properties on this particular object. So if we wanted to get hold of the name of our BP projectile, you can pull off of the self reference and type in get display name, which we've done before, and then you can hook up the display name into our print string. So now when we play and we fire off a new projectile, you can see it's printing the name of the projectile. And you can see for every new projectile I create, the name is a different one because the self that's being referred to by the member function is a different self. It is a different projectile. So we've learned that self is a node available inside of member functions that always points to the specific current instance that we are using. So the whole point of looking at member functions in the first place, the reason we started was because of these nodes in the level blueprint, where we get the static mesh, we get the forward vector, and then we add an impulse to these. These feel like they should live on the BP projectile. And so that's what I would like to challenge you to do. So this is a bit of an involved challenge, but we're getting towards the end of the section, so I will take you through step by step. So we're going to make a launch function on the BP projectile. So create it on the BP projectile, go to that plus button, add a new one, name it launch, then cut and paste the nodes over from the level blueprint into this newly created function of yours, and make sure you hook up execution pins and etc. Now, you're going to try and compile. We haven't done this very often in Blueprints, but compiling just allows you to essentially spell check your code and make sure that there aren't any errors that the Blueprint compiler can foresee. So the way you do this is you go to the button in the top left and you hit compile. And if there are any errors, they will show up at the bottom in the little pane called compiler results. You can see I've got compile successful, but any errors will show up here. And sometimes you'll get a little bit of red on a node to indicate where the error is. And I'd like to see if you can try and understand what that error is saying and try and fix the error using the new self node that we have learnt about. And then you need to go ahead and call that function from the level blueprint by dragging off of the instance, like we did for our print yourself node, drag off of the instance of the new projectile created from the spawn node and call the launch function. Pause the video and have a go. Okay, welcome back. So I'm going to go over to our BP projectile, hit the plus button next to functions in the My Blueprint pane, and type in launch to name the function that. Let's go back to our level blueprint, cut out the nodes, and go into the BP projectile and paste them in. Now I've got to hook up the execution from launch to add impulse. And now I'm going to hit compile. And you see I get an error on the static mesh or get static mesh node. And if you look in the compiler results, it says it uses an invalid target. So target, this input here, is not correct. Now, as I recommended you do, is you can right click and type in self to get a reference to self, and then bring that self into the target instead. Now, if you hit compile again, you can see the error has gone away and it is compiled successfully, because what's going on is that it's now able to get the static mesh component from the current projectile that this launch function is being called on. So if we go back to our level blueprint, now we can take the output pin from our spawn actor and we can type in launch to call our launch function. You can see the execution pin was automatically hooked up for me. And then after the launch function, we can hook up our print your name function if we want to, although that was just for debugging and demonstration purposes. And if you test it out, you can see that it's still launching successfully, except now the code that deals with launching lives on the projectile itself. Great stuff. We've learned about one of the cool concepts of object-oriented programming in this lecture, member functions. I will see you in the next one.